Welcome, dear listeners, to another exciting episode of ESRAG and the Climate Conversations. I'm your host, Ilya Admiral, and joining me, as always, is my co-host, ever curious, Felix.
It's a joy to be here. It's been a while. I wish you could have this almost every single hour, every single second. I mean, the topics are ever evolving, especially the attributes towards coming COP28. Much is being spoken about, much is being deliberated upon. And I'm sure today's guest will be one of those intriguing guests that will keep you thinking, keep you wondering, what is the world getting into?
Yeah, our guest today is Karen Hans. But before we get to her, I think it's good to kind of look back about some interesting climate news that lately have been going around, or that's something that has caught your eye, Felix, anything interesting that you have seen.
What I saw this week was a house made out of plastic waste in person. What they're doing is they're turning a certain special kind of plastics into building blocks for a house. And they have demo houses they've built out of plastic. You can plaster inside as much as you want. You can put additions to it. But the framework of it is made out of plastic. And now a second one is cooking gas that is made also out of special kind of plastic waste. This is they turn it into cooking gas, then they put it into canisters. Basically, these are canisters people usually use when you go camping. And then they have a whole program enterprise around it. And I found those two to be quite intriguing that plastic waste can be turned into such. I know there are pros and cons on it, something definitely I love to also engage our guest on, but I found that to be quite interesting to me.
Yeah, I think if you burn plastic, once you get like a lot of nanoplastic in the air and in the environment.
Yes, those are some of the dangers, some of the cons that pretty much we need to look into, because it might be one of those solutions that we think we've come across. But question is, what are the implications of it? So it will be interesting to kind of hear from our guest what she has to say about it.
All right. Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I think I heard years ago about project of putting plastic in asphalt in India, and it kind of backfired. So maybe there are new solutions that are there for houses. The news that I've seen this week or lately is that there's unprecedented growth of clean energy around the world. Of course, we still need way more investments and way more clean energy. But this year we had unprecedented growth, I think, by triple margins, even bigger than I imagined. Of course, you've seen a lot of cataclysm around the world this year, and I think a lot of people realize, okay, we need to act faster. But I think it's one of the good signs coming into later this year, the COP, that people are actually thinking, okay, we need to change. Of course, that COP is placed in a country that is producing a lot of oil, doesn't really help it. But I think we still need to see any positives that we can. What do you think, Felix?
That is totally true. I know it's been a point of contention, especially COP28 being held in a country that produces a lot of oil. But also, they're looking at the other side. How much has that country invested in solar energy, not only within itself, but also across other countries, developing countries? And having come from the Africa Climate Summit, I totally agree on the subject of clean energy being of great focus. Kenya, where the Africa Climate Summit was hosted, over 90% of its energy comes from renewable energy. So this is quite interesting that most countries are adopting the same. And I know much more that is looking at other developing countries, much more in the same.
I'd like to welcome our guest of today, Karen Hans. Karen Hans is a member of Rotary Club of Madison, Wisconsin, USA, since 2012. She's a co-founder of Environmental Sustainability Rotary Action Group to synergize her passions for Rotary service, protecting the environment, mitigating climate change by providing a way for like-minded Rotarians to collaborate. She has served as ESRAG Chair, Director of Communications, and Director of Projects, and now is the Partnership Envoy and Director of Training. As a member of Rotary International, first delegation to the UNEF climate talks, she attended COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland, in November 21. She also attended COP24 and arrived first observer delegate in December 2028. Welcome, Karen.
It's lovely to be here, Ilya and Felix.
Nice to have you. Karen with us today. Definitely, we are looking forward to the session. There's so much we can learn from you.
I'm looking forward to your questions.
Now, I jump into my first question for you. Could you share your personal journey of becoming a Rotarian and what inspired you to join the Rotary community?
So my first experience with Rotary was when I was selected to be a Rotary international exchange student in 1967-68. I went from my small town in rural Ohio to the big city of Adelaide, South Australia, in Australia. And I was concerned that I wasn't going to have to learn a new language. And then I realized that English is spoken many different ways around the planet. It was a formative year. I was fired up for Rotary, but back in those days, women couldn't join Rotary, and there really wasn't the same level of interact and Rotaract that there is now. And I went through most of my adult life volunteering and living according to the values of Rotary, the four-way test and service above self. But I wasn't a member of a Rotary club until I was invited to join the Rotary Club of Madison, Wisconsin, when we moved to town to be in-town grandparents. So my Rotary career started rather late for me. And pretty early on, I said, well, what will be my service path, my legacy in Rotary now that I've waited a whole lifetime to join? And there was a day of inspiration. I was in my cabin in rural Michigan, enjoying the splendor of nature and thinking about my then 6-month-old granddaughter. And I said, I'm a little over 60. What will the planet look like in 60 years when she is my age? What will she have? And it was the same weekend that global air quality monitors around the world for the first time registered 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide, when we all know that anything over 350 is dangerous for our planet's climate health. And I said, well, aren't people of goodwill doing something about this? Certainly, Rotary, Service Above Self, a great humanitarian organization, is there to help with the greatest humanitarian crisis our planet has ever known. And when I found out Rotary wasn't really doing anything about climate change, I began to research and look what could be done. And I started by going to my district's district conference the next weekend. And there I was introduced to the other co-founder of ESRAG, Paul Riemann, who was a past president of my Rotary Club, which is one of the 10 largest Rotary clubs in the world. At that time, we had over 400 members. Actually, at that time, we had over 500 members pre-COVID.
How do we agree to do anything with 500 members?
We have a large fellowship group system. We have a strong committee structure. And when you have that many members, you can afford to have paid staff. And Rotary International recognizes that the world of big clubs is different. They have a regular PETS training for president-elects, training seminar, and then they have a special extra training for presidents of big clubs. So things that many clubs are volunteer duties are actually paid staff duties. We have 2.5 full-time employees running our club. I digress. Our Madison, Wisconsin is both the capital of a state that depends largely on agriculture, although some manufacturing, and it's also the home of a very large research university, University of Wisconsin, with a strong agricultural component. So we have a broad base of members and a relatively more liberal club, and they provided a nurturing environment from which to explore why Rotary was not doing anything for the environment and how we could change that.
Well, Karen, you hold very dear role to us, I think. You hold the role of being a co-founder of ESRAG. Maybe you can explain who is the other co-founder. I think you already mentioned his name, probably. And could you provide insights into this role? How does this journey unfold for you?
So my first step to the formation of ESRAG, but I didn't know it at the time, was going to my district conference, which turned out to be a 5-minute walk from my home in Madison. And so I really didn't have any reason not to go. And I wanted people there to talk about climate And the organizer said, you can come and you can ask a question. And when I asked my question, everyone in my new club said, oh, you must meet our past president, Paul Riemann. And so Paul Riemann, a past president of the Rotary Club of Madison, which is one of the 10 largest clubs and over 500 members at the time, we teamed up to see what we could do about climate change through Rotary. One of the first barriers we hit was the fact that in every club constitution, it declares that the Rotary Club can't do anything political. And I thought, well, but the climate crisis has been wrongly politicized by people who don't want us to act. And Rotary, as a humanitarian organization, being active with climate solutions and leveraging its network, that's exactly where Rotary ought to be. And so, at the advice of my then district governor, he said, well, you have to go to the Council on Legislation and get a resolution passed. But that was an interesting journey, but a story for another podcast. Along the way, we looked at it, and as hard as I tried to avoid it, we ended up realizing that we needed to form a Rotary Action Group. Rotary International has a lot of requirements for action groups to follow. I think it's fair to say there are more burdens than benefits to being a Rotary Action Group, but just forming a fellowship wasn't available because there was already a fellowship of environmental Rotarians. To have an action group, you need at least 50 interested members from at least 5 different countries and different districts, so that it's truly an international effort. Unlike Rotary, which is club district focused, which is pretty local. So to get an international audience, I decided that I really needed to go to the next Rotary International Convention, which was 2014 in Sydney.
You went there all by yourself?
Yeah, at the last minute, I decided to go. I paid full price for convention. I ended up with a funny little hotel room in Chinatown and a long ride out to the convention, which was held at the Olympic grounds in Sydney.
Did you have flyers about ESRAG with you, or did you just kind of...
And I'll be happy to share that with you if we want to post it someplace. I realized that Rotary was all about water. The Water and Sanitation and Hygiene Action Group was very active. Rotarians like to do well projects and toilet blocks and hand wash stations. And so I worked with a University of Wisconsin professor and Nobel laureate, Dr. Jonathan Patz. And his favorite story is, Karen said I should talk about climate change without ever saying climate. I should talk only about water. And so that's how we introduced the notion of climate change action and an environmental action group, was how to make sure we always had water. Because that's a different mission from what WashRag has, which is mostly taps and toilets. We framed it through water. I collected hundreds of names. I didn't realize it at the time, but I actually met our immediate past chair, Pat Armstrong, there. There's a picture of us standing side by side, and some early ESRAG board members. The next year, I had health issues and could not go to the Sao Paulo convention. But we had the very first formative meeting there, and the folks who went to that meeting became founding members of ESRAG. And with that information, Paul Riemann and I together filed the application for recognition for the Environmental Sustainability Rotary Action Group. And I wanted to call it the Climate Change Action Group. And the staff said, Karen, I think the board won't vote for that. But if you call it environmental sustainability, I think you'll get them to say yes to that. And the rule when forming action groups is if you get turned down, you have to wait 3 years. So sometimes you go with the possible instead of the perfect. Rotary's taught me that valuable lesson. And we applied for recognition and got it October 2015. And then we had the task of building the organization.
That sounds quite a journey, Karen.
Barely started.
Yeah, well, you have to start somewhere. Right, Felix?
What a joy, what a joy, what a joy. Having gone through all you went through, it's quite amazing that it takes all that just to form ESRAG, which basically seems to make every sense, the need of it. The following question is, considering this, the environment is an area of focus within Rotary now. Can you shed light on the road of this journey and your involvement in establishing it? What challenges did you enter, and how much effort was invested in making it a crucial Rotary focus?
Well, thanks for that question, Felix. It was quite a journey all on its own. The areas of focus are a relatively new construct of the Rotary Foundation. Before the areas of focus were in place, back in the late 1990s, the Rotary Foundation was making global grants in 38 or 39 project areas, which meant a lot of staff and a lot of regulations and a lot of paperwork. And as part of streamlining and making the organization more nimble, they distilled those 38 grant areas into 6 areas of focus that they piloted through the Future Vision Project, which was just being evaluated when I went to my first convention. And I remember asking him, I said, well, why isn't the environment one of them? And the staff person said, because we're forbidden to add another area of focus until after 2017. So for those who aren't as deep a Rotary nerd as I am, let me share the 6 existing areas at the time that we started this. Peace and conflict resolution, water and sanitation and hygiene, community and economic development, basic education and literacy, disease prevention and treatment, and maternal and child health. At the time that they passed the simplified structure for funding Rotary Global grants, the director from Brazil said, but what about the Preserve Planet Earth movement? Why is there nothing about the environment in the new areas of focus? And someone said, well, it's a little part of community service. You can do an environmental project at the community level if you want. And they moved on. And then in 2017, we had the new age of the environment in Rotary International when Ian Risley became the president. And he asked us, in the name of environmental sustainability, each Rotarian to plant a tree. And he challenged every Rotary club to ensure that year that we planted a tree for every member. And that was really a great opportunity for ESRAG to be the center of advice and knowledge about tree planting. And because there were no other environmental structures in the Rotary world, everybody's inquiries were referred to us. ESRAG actually had to quickly rebuild its webpage so we wouldn't crash when everyone was sent to us for tree information. And Rotary's not good at keeping track of their accomplishments. We needed to plant 1.2 million trees. By best count, we did at least 4.3 million, and maybe there were more. But along the way, there was a doctrinal debate within ESRAG's board members. You know, what do we want the environment to be? And a lot of people said, we want it to be an umbrella. We want the other areas of focus to be under the umbrella of the environment, because no project can continue to be successful if the environment isn't supporting it and we're not taking care of the environmental aspects. So when a couple of clubs went through the Council on Legislation and proposed a 7th area of focus for the environment, our board did not immediately jump up and say yes. At the same time, I was asked by a new Arch Clump Society member, he was so frustrated. He had wanted to give Rotary $250,000, and he wanted to publicly dedicate that to the environment, and they would not let him. And I said, that sounds crazy to me. That's a lot of money to not get to say where you want it to go. And I began researching, and that's when I learned that Rotary International has set a banquet table with, at that time, 6 place settings, 1 for each area of focus. And if you had an area of focus, you got global grant money, scholarship money, easier to get into the Peace Fellow program, cadre of technical advisors, program support, an area focus manager. All of these benefits from the Rotary world came to you if you were in one of those 6 silos, and the environment wasn't. I said, well, if we're going to get anything done, a silo is not the first choice for the environment, but it's what we've got. Let's go with it. And we became part of that discussion. Along the way, the trustees were asked to revisit the number of areas of focus, and they said, we're fine. We'll sprinkle little green leaves of sustainability over the existing 6, and we're done with it. And this was 2020. The pandemic was just taking hold. And the current president of Rotary International said, that was Mark Maloney, and he said, I think we need to look again at the area of focus for the environment. I think for Rotary to be relevant to the next generation of members, for membership growth, we need to revisit this. Ian Risley chaired the Environmental Issues Task Force, and somehow or other, I managed to get invited to come on behalf of ESRAG to explain to the members of the task force why Rotary needed to add the environment to its program of causes. It turns out that I was the only ordinary Rotarian invited to speak to this group of people. They wanted to hear from university professors. They wanted to assess the media posture of talking about the environment. They wanted to learn about other organizations in the environment field and how they managed philanthropy. In other words, I said, Rotarians, there are many Rotarians who care about the environment. If they had an area of focus for the environment, they would give their environment dollars to Rotary, but there's no place for it to go there, so they give it to somebody else. The next generation of people who might be interested in service want to fix the broken climate. Rotary needs to give them a place to do that. And I took a deep breath and said to these senior leaders that there were a lot of climate deniers who had disproportionate access to the senior leadership and had wrongly politicized a humanitarian crisis to keep Rotary from acting. And that for Rotary to be relevant to the next generation that cares so much about climate, we needed to add the environment and climate change. And at the end of the day, I never got any follow-up. This was the beginning of February, and the pandemic was in force a month later. And I didn't get to find out what happened for a couple of years. But the board went on. The trustees voted unanimously to add the environment as an area of focus, and they wanted to make it a 7th one rather than combine 2 others. And the board of directors also unanimously approved. And at the end of Mark Maloney's term, which was the depth of the pandemic, they announced that beginning June of 2021, there would be program support for the 7th area of focus. Now, it's curious how they actually decided to describe this area of focus. And I'd be happy to talk about that if you'd be interested.
Wow. It's a very lengthy process, Karen. It's quite amazing to hear how such things can be moved. In my opinion, you kind of moved the mountain here.
Well, yes, except that's kind of a marketing formulation and branding. And then they said, but we're supporting another area of focus. We need a different verb. How about protecting the environment, which then sort of, brings up an interesting image of Rotarians moving from their business meeting with their suits and lapel pins on to surround a tree or something. One of the original arguments of the board of trustees was they would have to change the mission statement of the foundation to add the environment. And that was the reason they couldn't add it. And eventually they said, okay, we'll add it. And they weren't content with just protecting or supporting. They said that the mission of the foundation was to improve the environment, which is an even bigger ask of themselves. I realize that the gerunds don't matter. The environment is the subject matter. And we just want to make sure that the environment always explicitly includes the notion of working for climate solutions.
This is quite a story. It's intriguing. People charter Rotary clubs. She has not chartered a Rotary club. She's actually brought in a new focus under Rotary International. That's more like creating a different world. creating a different ecosystem, creating a different planet, something of the sort. What a story, what a story.
Thank you, Felix. Well, on a day when I'm discouraged, I say, yes, I am steering the big ocean going vessel of Rotary International from the back, from my kayak with a broken paddle.
True, true, true. And that's why I call her, she's a heroine. I mean, what she's done is just, when we were growing, we used to watch cartoons. We had Spider Woman, we had all this amazing Wonder Woman. If I was to give her a character, in fact, if anything, I think Disney World needs to be able to create a character after her. Somebody who actually, literally speaking, was flying from here to there just to make the world a better place.
Thank you, but I didn't do it alone. My vision has always been to create a place for Rotarians to gather and to have something ready when Rotary International woke up to the fact that it's where they needed to be. And they have. It's just amazing. This year, the delegation to the COP in Dubai is going to include the president of Rotary International, the Gordon McAnally, the chair of the Foundation trustees, Barry Rassin, the general secretary of Rotary, John Huco, and other Rotary members. I'm kind of sad I won't be there, but it's okay. Now we need, as Rotary steps onto the world stage, we need to make, I'm really excited that the current chair of ESRAG, Yashar Adachik, will also be part of that delegation. But what really we need to do now, we need to make sure there's substance around Rotary's participation in important forum like this. I know we call ourselves people of action, but I think in the climate and environmental field, because we're relatively new to this, we need to also make sure that we're people of substance. And if I could ask anything of Rotary senior leadership, it was to make sure that they tapped the resources of our Rotary Action Group, because it represents hundreds of years of professional environmental expertise, as well as the passion of ordinary Rotarians inspired to do something for our planet.
I think what Felix mentioned in the beginning. You have projects that are plastic building houses, you have plastic burning, you have a variety of projects. Don't you think there has been no kind of feedback on a project that Rotary has been implementing? Get some feedback from some scientific ways, because I feel like a lot of environmental projects have been created without any second thought.
Well, I agree with that concern. Superficially, we've got a plastic waste problem. If we try to get it off our beaches and coastlines and out of our rivers and the ocean, okay, what do we do with it? It was used for 15 minutes and it's designed to last for 400 years. Where do we put it? Well, if you make clothing out of it, like recycled milk bottles turn into a polar fleece, but then they shed microplastics when you wash, and it ends up in the waterways and the food chain and your babies. And all of a sudden we're eating, drinking plastic and probably exhaling nanoparticles when we breathe. So that's an unintended consequence.
This is plastic breathing.
Yes, plastic breathing. You make it out of bricks. I like to hear, Felix, that those homes were plastered, because I'm worried about the nanoparticles that shed from the plastic in the bricks that end up inside homes. That's a concern. Could you make cooking gas? Well, cooking gas is better than cutting wood or charcoal or making charcoal to burn in inefficient 3-rock fires and inefficient cook stoves. Yes. But when you burn plastic, some of the polymers, some of the additives in the plastic become very nasty chemicals in the air. There's often chloride, and then you're creating dioxin. Has anybody thought about the dioxin if you use plastic as a fuel? A lot of places that would be tempted to burn plastic as a destruction solution don't have appropriate air pollution control technology to clean all of the extra gases out of the air. The biggest concern is If we are creative and provide a solution, the plastics industry will have perverse incentives to continue to put more virgin plastics into the environment. Well, they figured out what to do with our garbage. We'll make garbage for them to deal with, and they'll come up with solutions that also have unintended consequences. But let's put more plastic into the environment. I think the deep expertise of ESRAG can help avoid the unintended consequences, because whether your goal is protecting, supporting, or improving the environment, it's a very complex topic, not necessarily nearly as straightforward as drilling a well and putting in toilet blocks. And by the way, how are you pumping the water out of the well? Are you using a diesel generator or a gas engine? Or are you using solar and wind renewables to help get water to that community? Rotary wants to do good things. We need to handle the complexities.
Listening to the journey of the seventh focus, and also the presence of Rotary International in the upcoming COP28. I know in the past, women were not allowed into Rotary, but see the beauty that comes with inclusion. And also something else I wanted also to point out is going back to the Africa Climate Summit. It's of interest to point out the kind of expertise that Karen was speaking about, that Rotary members have, because looking at the Secretariat of the Africa Climate Summit, it's interesting to note that it was made of members who are Rotarians. So we do have what it takes to make the world a better place. I just wanted to point out that. I have the last question for you. Considering the escalating urgency of climate change, where do you envision both ESRAG and Rotary heading in the future? With the undeniable presence of climate challenges globally, how do you believe these organizations can drive meaningful action given the pressing timelines?
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about that, Felix, because it is at the core of why I began this journey with Rotary. Rotary has such an excellent reputation around the globe as a humanitarian organization that puts together willing, knowledgeable, responsible volunteers who show up. But they're also leaders in their communities. One of my colleagues that I met from my 2 times at the UN's climate talks, and she joined ESRAG as a result of our connections. She described Rotary as a globally connected network of local community leaders. And the governments of the world are not doing enough. And that may be because they don't feel the pressure from the local communities and the business leaders to do more. And Rotary is in a unique position as individuals imbued and informed by the Rotary values to say, I care about my community and my children and other people's children, and I want you to do more. I want to see more ambition towards solutions. So on a day of supreme idealism, and they're getting harder for me to find, if every Rotarian, every Rotary Club member and Rotaractor, 1.4 million of us and our families got together and actually put climate as the most important thing we cared about, we ought to be able to shift the needle with each of our governments to really meaningfully meet these climate goals. And that's why I started this journey, and that's the potential I see.
And for your granddaughter, remember your granddaughter, she's old.
And for my granddaughter, who's now 10, and I have to tell you that I was showing her the picture that I use when I do a slide presentation. She says, Grandma, I think that's really creepy that you're showing that picture of me as a baby. And I said, well, Claire, you as a baby and how you would grow up in the world you would inherit, that's what inspired my work. And I'm doing this work for you, and other people want to understand what inspires me, and thinking about what you need is my inspiration. Can I still use your picture? And she said, oh, yeah, Grandma, now that you told me why, sure, it's okay. Does that mean that I've been successful in enrolling my grandchildren to be climate warriors with me? As much as I would have liked, but I figure they'll find their way eventually. And meanwhile, we have to keep the institutions of civilization going so that there's a place for them to intercede.
I think your name is also a bit fitting in a way. Your name is Kendrick Hans, and it kind of incorporate into caring hands for the environment.
Oh, thank you. I like that a lot. I guess I want to take a moment as we maybe wrap up to share an insight that I got in 2018 after the climate talks. As a Rotary exchange student, I feel that my life was permanently changed by Rotary because I got a larger, wider worldview and early on valued service above self. And as a result, I had the honor to go to the climate talks in Poland as sort of an advanced scout, because in 2018, we did not yet have an area of focus for the environment. But then Peter Kyle, then Dean of the Rotary Representative Network, made it possible for me to go. And that experience helped get Rotary now to having a complete delegation of senior leadership participating in Dubai. So things grow. At that event, Greta Thunberg was a teenager and everywhere. And I thought, well, I'm not going to bother her. But I did step beside her dad, and he was hurrying from one event to the next. And I handed him my business card, and he looked down and he said, oh, Rotary. I was a Rotary Youth Exchange student. And I thought, wow, I have a son who became an active advocate for better public transportation for both social equity, city building, and the environment. And here's another Rotary Exchange student whose daughter has been the best known youth, at least in Europe, for climate, Greta Thunberg. So the influence of Rotary providing me an exchange year didn't just influence who I am, it influenced all the people with whom I interact and informed the work of the next generation of activists and leaders. And what an opportunity we have through the Rotary globally connected network of local community leaders through the generations to leave the world a better place and the climate a safer climate than we found it.
Wow, what a story. The power of influence, the power of Rotary, how instrumental it is in the decisions that are made every day from policy level to implementation. It's undeniable. The numbers are innumerable. Well, Rotary definitely leads the world in creating a better life for everybody, and that remains unquestionable.
I think we have a future activist on hands.
Well, it's undeniable. For sure, it's undeniable. The impact of Rotary, impact of ESRAG, it's undeniable. It touches many other lives other than just ourselves towards making the world a better place for all. Thank you so much for the insights that have been shared. This is one of those recordings that you want to keep listening to. The stories make you want to sit around a fire and ask for a drink and just keep on listening to the entire story because it's rich, it's deep, and it's inspiring. Now back to you, Admiral.
Any last words, Karen, before we finish this year's guest?
I guess an expression of personal gratitude for the work that so many people do in ESRAG to make the world a better place and to help ESRAG run and to create a community for the future of our planet. And I'm grateful that the work that I had the privilege and honor to help start will continue forward thanks to people like Ilya and Felix.
Well, Felix, I don't know how about you, but I have learned quite a lot today. about ESRAG and where our action group comes from. It's very on hands, I believe.
It's been quite a journey, quite a journey.
But let's go in our closing, as usual. We are going to share some fun or positive news that we read about the environment. And I'm going to start today. And the thing that I read about is there are a couple of circuses. They're using holograms instead of real animals. So they're using either 3D or they're using projected holograms. And then these animals are doing the tricks or they're showing them in very beautiful scale. Can you imagine something like that? That instead of real animals in a circus, you have just holograms of animals. Any animals you can think of can actually be a hologram, right?
That's kind of scary, to be honest, which means it can happen anywhere. Wow. Technology, it's always advancing. There's no end to it, and there's no telling what's going to be coming next after this.
Yeah, I think for circus use, it is very interesting because then in circus, you don't really have to make animals do things that they don't want to do. Have you seen any interesting animals? Have you seen any interesting news on news?
There hasn't been any in particular pertaining to animals, but it has been all nothing but technology on my end. Now, what I didn't mention earlier on is there's a man who's created a diesel fuel out of plastic. This is something that runs in the engine and the car kind of moves. So I found that also to be quite interesting. It's been one of those weeks whereby it was one innovation after another, one innovation after another. Now, for the diesel, this one works because he's using it on his own car in such a way he gets the plastic waste, he creates the fuel, and he pumps his own gas, and it just keeps on running. So I think it's a cheap way to have a whole cottage industry, producing your own fuel for your own car. But I found that also to be quite interesting on my end.
We'd like to express our deep gratitude to Environmental Sustainability Rotary Action Group, ESRAG, for their support and setting up this podcast. Their dedication for environmental sustainability is commendable, and we're proud to be associated with such forward-thinking organization and action group.
Thank you for the time you've taken to listen to us. We don't take it for granted. We also would like to thank Rotary for making this possible. We'd like to thank Laurie for having initiated such a podcast. We'd like to thank our guests for such an insightful night. We know that every one of us can make a difference, and every little does make a difference. It could be turning off the lights. It could be how you use the water systems. It could be what you eat, especially the plant diet-based nutritions. Did you know that it's the second most ability system to be able to ensure that we don't reach 2 degrees Celsius by 2021? So every effort that you make does make a difference. It might seem little, might seem minute, but your footprint, the much reduced, the carbon footprint, it all adds up to something that is mountable. Thank you for listening to us, and we look forward to engaging further with you in the next run.
Yeah, I would like to thank Karen once again for joining us today. We're truly honored to have you today on our show. And remember, every action counts when it comes to tackling climate change. Stay informed, stay inspired, and stay committed to making positive impact. We'd like to address you if you have any questions to go on ESRAG website, esrag.org. And thank you for listening and see you at the next episode.